Ireland's oldest national park was established here in 1933 and now has global status, being included on the prestigious United Nations list of outstanding national parks. The park covers just over 10,000 hectares. For centuries, Killarney has been famous for its natural beauty, tranquility and solitude. Like many other beautiful places in Ireland, it has long been inhabited. It has been a special place since early Christian times. The monastery in Inishvallen Island is said to have been founded by St. Finian in the 7th century, and it was here, in these quiet glades, that a vital historical document, the Annals of Inishvallen, was written. The Franciscan friary, now called Muckross Abbey, was founded about 1448. It's the burial place of chieftains and poets. For most visitors, Muckross House is the focal point of the national park. The moist, mild climate of the Killarney lowlands supports some of Ireland's most extraordinary plant life. This is blue-eyed grass. It's widespread in the eastern United States, but is not found anywhere else in Europe. The nearest place it grows outside the west of Ireland is Newfoundland. The arbutus is a Mediterranean plant. Also called the strawberry tree, it flowers and fruits simultaneously. Killarney is the only place in Ireland where it's common, and it doesn't occur at all in Britain. Large-flowered butterworth is another speciality of the park. It only grows in a very few other places in Ireland and nowhere in Britain. The Killarney National Park lies on two distinct and contrasting rock formations, which result in two distinct and exclusive kinds of vegetation. This is old red sandstone, where soils are generally acid and relatively infertile. Here grow the famous woods of sessile oak, the oak tree that is typical of acid ground. In a few areas, the damp acid soil supports battalions of bluebells. The forest canopy is like a vast power station. Spread out flat, the millions of Killarney oak leaves would form a solar cell some 200 square kilometers in size. The tree creeper is searching for grubs and larvae in the cracks of the old oaks. But this beautiful woodland is under threat. The problem is that no young trees are growing up to replace these mature oaks. If nothing is done, the forest will die. And here's one of the culprits. This is a newborn sika deer. In 1865, one stag and two female sikas were introduced into the Killarney Valley from Japan. Since then, the sikas have been breeding here all too successfully. There are now reckoned to be between 850 and 1,250 animals. They graze on tree seedlings, so preventing the forest from regeneration and adding to the grazing pressure already caused by the native red deer. The park is committed to a policy of control. The long-term conservation of the natural woodlands is of fundamental importance in the Killarney National Park. Apart from the sandstone, the other significant rock in Killarney is limestone. The eroded limestone reef and pavement makes for wonderful sculptural effects. On it grows the Reenadina wood, the only major standard yew woodland in Ireland. In fact, it's one of the largest expanses of natural yew forest in Europe. The yew woods come to life in the autumn. Their rich food stores of berries attract birds from all over Europe. Song thrushes and mistle thrushes rush to gobble up the nutritious fruit. On the ground below, the tits have beaks strong enough to split the hard yew seeds that the thrushes discard. Conserving nature is the primary objective of the park, but at the same time, it has to welcome hundreds of thousands of visitors a year. Somehow, historic sites have to be protected and the beauty of the park shown to people without compromising the wildlife. Management also involves scientific research, particularly into the native red deer. The red deer is the most important wild mammal occurring in the park. Each calf they catch is marked with a unique tag, so they can plot its seasonal movements throughout the park for years ahead. The high tops of the Kerry Hills can look very beautiful after the autumn rains. But for those deer that remain up here, this can be a bleak and treacherous landscape in midwinter. Part of the herd will move down into the lowlands as autumn progresses. In theory, this increases the risk of hybridization with seekers. The white rump is the seeker's field mark, and seekers are more common in the lowlands. So far, however, hybrids have not occurred here. The research has already proved that there's a problem with the quality of fodder on the mountains. To solve the problem of the poor grazing for the deer back on the hills, these cattle have been conscripted. They're a pedigree herd of traditional Kerry cattle, and they have a job to do up on the mountains. Far out on the moorlands where the red deer live, a series of enclosures is being erected. These pens are to keep the Kerry cattle in. Specially bred for this terrain over many years, the Kerry cattle will improve grazing conditions for the deer by trampling down the least nutritious plants and creating space for a variety of new shoots to grow. Visitors are welcome to enjoy the solitude of the Killarney Hills. But feet do damage. So an imaginative solution has been found to reduce the effect of the growing numbers of walkers here. Enthusiastic volunteers have helped to stretch a comfortable but unobtrusive path across the bogs. It's been weeks of hard work, but the results will make it worthwhile. From now on, infinite footsteps need have no impact on the beautiful Killarney moors. This compromise between public access and the protection of the environment is an eloquent expression of the aims of our national parks. Amid the moorlands and mountains of Wicklow, little more than a stone's throw from the heart of Dublin, lies the Wicklow Mountains National Park. The core area was established as late as 1990. Eventually, the national park will measure 30,000 hectares. For the sake of rare species, like the merlin, one goal of the park is the restoration of the open bogland, at present encroached upon by commercial plantations. This is a space for wildlife on the edge of a tamed landscape. At the heart of the Wicklow Mountains is the deep glaciated lake system of Glendalough. The upper lake is bordered by two types of woodland. On the northern shore, there are tall stands of Scots pines. These were probably planted in 1850 by the Mining Company of Ireland to supply pit props. Our native Scots pine disappeared some 1800 years ago. The red squirrel hangs on here too. Across the water on the south side of the valley, there is a woodland of native sessile oaks. Ireland doesn't have many oak forests, but those we do have shelter unusual species. Redstarts are extremely rare in this country. They get their name from the way they flick and fan their red tails. The female is a more sober mixture of browns and greys, with only the red tail for contrast. This pair is taking it in turns to carry flies and caterpillars to the chicks hidden in a nest in a crack in one of the oaks. It's a busy routine, taking in food and bringing out the refuse. Another very rare bird found here is the wood warbler. It's a typical bird of this sort of oak woodland. Sessile oak is the species of oak that grows best on acid soils. The wood warbler has a yellow throat and a pure white underbody, but most strikingly, its wingtips reach almost to the end of the tail. This conspicuous shape distinguishes it from other leaf warblers, such as this willow warbler. The willow warbler is smaller, and as it visits its nest on the ground, you can see that it's grey-brown on the back and has a buff-coloured throat. Its wings are much shorter than the wood warbler's in comparison with its tail. Way up among the cliffs and crags of the inaccessible hilltops There's another beneficiary of the national park. The peregrine falcon has a healthy nest full of chicks. But will she rear all three successfully? In other, less secure situations, she'd be lucky to rear one. But these birds are under the watchful eye of park rangers. She will feed them grouse, pigeons, rooks, crows, thrushes and blackbirds, for they've chosen their nest site in an area with plenty of prey. Here in Wicklow, there are now between 30 and 40 breeding pairs, as well as a number of non-breeders. Peregrines are a model of ideal family life. The young peregrines never squabble or fight, either with themselves or their parents. The wild landscape of the Wicklow Hills contains one particularly romantic spot. For it is here that the headwaters of the Liffey first seep out of the ground and trickle down under the mountain road. From these inconspicuous beginnings, the great river starts its journey, glittering over glistening rock towards the heart of Dublin. This is granite, so the waters are acid, and there will not be a lot of life in them. But these shallow, fast-flowing mountain streams are the exclusive territory of the dipper, a strange and solitary bird, shaped like a big wren. It likes to nest in a hole just above the waterline, often under a bridge. The dipper has peculiar hunting habits, which entail finding its food underwater. The dipper's feathers are waterproof, so it can walk underwater to catch the caddisflies. The Wicklow Mountains lie on the doorstep of Dublin and have been a playground for its citizens since the 18th century. The cultural centre of the Wicklow Mountains lies down below at Glendalough. Here, sometime in the 6th century, St. Kevin established what became one of the great monastic cities of early Christian Ireland. The dominant building is the Round Tower, about 100 foot high. The walls taper upwards elegantly. Legend and folklore enrich every ancient stone. If you can get your arms around this one, you'll find the love of your life. But an atmosphere of holiness lingers. A hallowed stone has been eroded by reverent fingers. Time has spared some architectural details and the work of early artists. Legend accords St. Kevin the same reputation as St. Francis. We are told that once while at prayer, a blackbird nested in his outstretched hand, and he kept still until she'd hatched out her young. Up above in the hills, summer has progressed, and the peregrine's eyrie is nearly empty. Only the youngest chick is left at the nest, still showing some downy chick feathers. Any day now, he'll launch himself on his first flight to join his siblings being fed in the valley below. The national park protects the landscape, but it's really nature that's in control. From late summer onwards, huge weather systems can hit the Wicklow Hills. Rain falls in torrents, and the streams are soon swollen. This wild kid has been separated from the rest of the herd of fern goats that roam the hills above Glendalough. She tries to find a way across. Now she's over and is welcomed by the whole family. After the spate, the streams quickly subside. But on these hills of granite, the soil remains waterlogged, producing these ranges of peatland and heather. This wind-swept terrain is the hunting ground of the merlin. It's also the territory of the shy, mountainy fox. The merlin is a small falcon, not much bigger than a thrush, which hunts fast and low over the moors, picking off smaller birds, like this reed bunting. The female windchat is watching anxiously. But the merlin has eaten her fill, so for now the windchats are safe. Windchats are another rare moorland bird. A few come here to breed in the summer. Fires in the national park area always alarm and confuse the wildlife. Years of careful management are undone in a few minutes once a fire gets out of control. It's autumn, and up in the hills, the deer are beginning to rut. The males are searching out likely females and beginning to compete with each other for their attention. The Wicklow deer are no longer a pure breed. The native red deer has hybridized with the smaller Japanese Sika deer that escaped from the Powers Court estate in 1861. Now the conspicuous white rump, the Sika field mark, is noticeable on many of the bigger animals that otherwise look and sound like red deer. The stag displays by churning up the peat with its antlers and tossing clods of earth into the sky. This is not a serious fight, more of a practice tussle. The females have to be receptive to the attentions of the stag. It's she who will make the decision, however impressive his display. comes, winter in the hills can be harsh. For all life up here, survival is pushed to the limits. But what the Wicklow Mountains National Park provides is a bulwark, not against the demands of the season, but against the loss of wilderness. Here in the heart of the west of Ireland, in County Galway, the Connemara National Park covers some 2,700 hectares. This is a land of mountains and wild, windswept peatland, where the purple moorgrass blows, open grasslands and cold, clear lakes. Connemara is famously wet. The hills trap the moisture that is carried in by the winds from the Atlantic. More than 1,600 millimeters of rain falls each year, creating this waterlogged landscape. These ribbons of lakes are visited by otters. Ireland probably has more otters than any other country in Europe, but they're very elusive. The best time to see one is late evening or early morning, because they're mainly nocturnal and very wary. They thrive in the unpolluted and undisturbed waters of the west of Ireland. A journey through the interior of this peatland of open lakes and narrow channels will take you to secret colonies of birds, which are of great interest to the national park. Here, there is a little-known inland colony of cormorants. Inland colonies of this seabird are rare nowadays anywhere in Europe because of persecution, habitat changes, and not least, destruction of nesting sites by the birds themselves. Their droppings kill the trees. This island is now pretty well denuded, almost a desert, although the colony is still flourishing, at least for the moment. The adults commute from the ocean, where they go to fish. Both parents bring food and water to the young until they fledge. The chicks beg for the food that the parent is carrying in its stomach. The cormorants are not the only interesting birds using these lakes. Common gulls have also set up their claims to space here. There's competition for the use of available perching places. Standing guard on its favourite lookout post, the common gull looks misleadingly gentle, almost dove-like. It's not primarily a coastal nester. It prefers to lay its eggs on little islands way out in the bog pools. Tucked up on these inaccessible rocks, it's safe from foxes while it's incubating its eggs. Because there's not much cover out here, when the chick hatches, it uses the adult as a sunshade on those rare hot days in the bog. Although it's smaller and much less powerful than most other gulls, it's quite aggressive. Quite capable of keeping much bigger predators away. While the adults are absent, the chicks become increasingly adventurous. But however far they stray, the parents can always identify their own chicks by the pattern of dark marking on their crowns. Most common gulls return to nest in the colony where they were born. And 90% of pairs actually use the same nest site year after year. The wild open landscape is Connemara's greatest environmental resource. The exploitation of the bog itself is something else the national park attempts to control. It is internationally acknowledged that this unique peatland should be preserved. The saving of turf is a traditional rural skill. The preservation of Connemara's bogs takes on an added significance in a world where peatlands are disappearing so fast. This is the bird that more than any other so evocatively captures the character of the bogland, the golden plover. Together, Ireland and Britain hold over 99% of the EU breeding population. But unfortunately, with the spread of plantations, our birds are now showing a distinct decrease. There may be as few as 400 pairs. The boglands of the Connemara National Park contain the rich plant life whose variety always surprises. Bog asphodel also has a useful adaptation for bog life. It can be pollinated by rain. It's a member of the lily family, widespread on the surface of these blanket bogs. As summer ends, it looks quite different. It dries up and turns a rusty colour. Moving on to slightly drier land, there's juniper, growing low here to escape the wind. But what attracts botanists to Connemara is the wide variety of heathers that the park protects. These are the tiny pinkish-white beads of ling. Bell heather in the background is another common heather. But the big bells of St. Dabioch's heath indicate a much rarer plant. It's found only in Connemara and Mayo. Mackay's heath is the rarest of these heathers. Apart from a couple of spots in Donegal and Mayo, this is the only place, either in Ireland or Britain, where it's known to grow. In 1982, the park's wildlife community was expanded. Moving red deer here to Connemara was a safety measure. Until this project began, the Irish red deer existed only in Killarney, where hybridization with Japanese sika deer might one day occur. There are no sikas in this park. The new Connemara herd is breeding successfully and now numbers nearly 40 individuals. One management problem that's a major headache for the park is uncontrolled grazing by sheep. At the visitor centre of the national park, people can have some of these management problems explained to them. During the summer, rangers are available to host guided walks which explain the landscape, the archaeology, and the plant life. But so many people visiting brings its own problems. It's a sad and familiar irony that we ourselves can do an inordinate amount of damage to the very places we love to enjoy. The largest mammal in the park is the Connemara pony. Although a domestic animal, the pony is very much part of the Connemara countryside. These ponies are internationally famous as hardy riding animals. A carefully monitored herd of purebred pedigree Connemara ponies is being established here to assist in conserving this unique equine breed. The breeding mares are kept close to the centre, where they're a perennial attraction for children. Connemara National Park is conspicuously child-friendly. The park is fulfilling its duty of preservation, interpretation and accessibility, a role essential to preserving the people's landscape. The Glenveigh National Park lies away up in the northwest of Ireland, in County Donegal. Here in sight of Errigal and Slieve Snacht, the two highest peaks in Donegal, the park covers some 14,000 hectares. It stretches between the Derry Bay and the Glendown Mountains. The solitude and tranquility of these great expanses of trackless bog conceal secrets that you rarely see. Its inaccessibility over the generations has meant that man's impact here has been relatively slight, and it's important to keep it that way. Loch Veigh lies at the heart of the park. Long and deep, it has a mysterious beauty, and it's used by one of the rarest species of bird breeding in Ireland. One of Ireland's most famous saints, Columkill, was born a few miles from Glenveigh by the shores of Loch Garten in the year 521. A ruined church marks the site of Columkill's monastery. It's still a place of pilgrimage, perhaps for those facing the same fate as Columkill, the loneliness of a life abroad. Tragedy and exile marred the original consolidation of the estate that is now the national park. 47 families were evicted from here in April 1861. Until then, the landlord, an Irishman, John George Adair, had been known as a passionate nationalist and a fervent advocate of tenants' rights. Ironically, this barbarity preserved the wildness of the place, and now 100,000 visitors come to the park each year. They have to search for the visitor centre because from a distance it's almost invisible. The site is skillfully disguised as a piece of bog. It was sunk into the ground, covered with peat sods and planted with heather. This sensitive design sums up the park's continuing effort not to detract from the natural environment. The national park aims to address this problem by channeling visitors along a well-organized route. They can enjoy looking at the breathtaking scenery, but they have only a limited impact on the wider, pristine environment. For many, the destination of the journey is the castle. Standing alone in its dramatic glaciated valley, it's the epitome of romance. It was built by John Adair in the 1870s in a style that fitted the Victorian notion of what was right for a castle in the wilderness. Down below the castle is a very beautiful garden, the crowning achievement of Henry McElhenny's ownership of Glenveigh. Cornelia Adair had begun the planting of the gardens, but it was he who transformed the grounds into one of the great gardens of Europe. Although quite far north, the glaciated valley is remarkably sheltered, owing to its steep sides, and can foster plants that don't thrive elsewhere in Ulster. Over a period of 30 years, McElhenny gradually developed the gardens, putting in rare or simply beautiful plants. The backdrop is the Gothic conservatory designed by Philippe Julian. Visitors love to stroll along neatly ordered paths, admiring the well-laid-out beds. In the early mornings, there are red deer, hidden, secretive, out on the hills. Native red deer had died out in Donegal by the mid-19th century. In 1891, Cornelia Adair brought 6 deer over from Lincolnshire. Edward VII helped out with the gift of a stag, and in due course, many more were introduced. There are now around 500 deer. Glenveigh's oak woods, though small, are significant because natural oak woods are so few in Ireland. But too many deer have a disastrous impact on the woods. They eat every seedling that appears. They break down the undergrowth while rutting, so the understory disappears and the forests cannot regenerate. The national park has yet another major problem to contend with. This plant, Rhododendron ponticum. From the castle garden where Mrs. Adair planted it in the last century, it has spread into the surrounding mountainsides. It may look pretty, but it's become a scourge here, just as it has in Killarney and elsewhere in Ireland. It grows quickly and strongly, producing a dense and smothering carpet like this. No native plants can compete with this aggressive foreigner. Not even the oak trees will grow here. It's a dead monoculture, for no wildlife is sustained in its suffocating shadows. Since 1989, a considerable area of rhododendron has been eradicated by contract work, and it's hoped to get rid of all unwanted rhododendrons by the end of this millennium. But if the rhododendron could be ousted, one would see an amazing biological change over the next 20 years. Lochveigh itself is not only beautiful, it's also an important wildlife resource. Its solitude and tranquility is unsurpassed. Few people come so far up the lake, so here the otters play. one of Ireland's most appealing mammals. They will fish in the river estuaries on the Atlantic coast. But come to quiet places like this to rear their young. There are usually 2 to 3 in a litter. There's lots of time to play, but there are also serious tasks to attend to. Although a creature of the waters, the young don't swim by instinct. They have to learn. Mother is teaching this cub. These upland streams are important for wildlife. Among the stones, you'll often see a dipper, blinking and dipping in its characteristic way. The insect life of these mountain streams is not particularly varied. But the quietest waters here support one of Ireland's most elusive creatures, the water rail. You'll have to wait a long time to see it, but you might be lucky. It's very shy and very rarely seen or photographed as it stalks the undergrowth at the water's edge, searching for invertebrates. You probably have a better chance here of seeing that other exotic and beautiful creature, the red-throated diver, albeit at a distance. Although there are probably fewer than 10 pairs breeding in the whole of Ireland, all are found in Donegal. The red-throated diver is rare here because County Donegal is at the southernmost edge of its European range. Divers spend their winters off the coast, coming inland in the summers to breed. Loch Veigh is their summer fishing grounds. They don't nest here, preferring secret pools high up in the hills. The cold and isolated waters of Loch Veigh nurture their own genetically distinct populations of fish. The stony lake bottom is the nursery of this race of Arctic char. They are salmonids, but can survive only in the coldest and deepest waters, where they grow very slowly. Up above Loch Veigh, the steep mountains are etched with inaccessible gullies. These are the breeding places for another unusual summer visitor, the ring ouzel. It's a very shy bird, which is rarely seen. The nest is tucked into a precipitous ledge. 3 to 4 chicks are a full brood. Both parents tend the chicks. The female is brown, like its relative, the hen blackbird. The male is jet black. Both sexes have a conspicuous white crescent on the breast. Glenveigh National Park is so managed that its landscape and the lives of the animals it protects are hardly disturbed by our presence as visitors. And it's an ironic quirk of history that this land, once wrenched so brutally from its inhabitants, has been returned to us, their successors, as part of the people's landscape. South of Galway Bay, in North County Clare, is the Burren, which means rocky place in Irish. This is Ireland's finest expanse of limestone. Some of the most unusual plants in the whole of Ireland grow here, like hoary rock rose, which is found nowhere else in the country. At first glance, these weather-beaten stretches of bare rock seem almost lifeless. The traces of early man are more obvious. Ancient burial chambers dot the hillsides. This is a landscape that has been lived in for over 5,000 years. And out of the rock well deep rivers that flow and vanish again, indicating a complex water system that has a profound influence on the life of the Burren. At the heart of this stark landscape is Mullaghmore. This lonely hillside is the focus of the Burren National Park. Only 1,300 hectares, it's the smallest national park in Ireland. But despite its modest size, it supports some of Ireland's wildest creatures. These desolate rocklands are the hunting grounds of the peregrine falcon, the swiftest and most skillful bird of prey. Down below the craggy site of the peregrine's nest, the sparse groves of hazel shelter another very unusual creature. The pine marten is one of the rarest mammals in the whole of Ireland and Britain. It's very seldom seen, unless caught unawares sunning itself on a warm rock. The flowers that grow here seem to defy all the usual rules of ecology and distribution, and no one has ever been able to explain adequately the botanical puzzles. But many visitors to the Burren National Park find it a mysterious place. It's difficult to make sense of this vast rock garden. Many of the plants that grow here will not be found in other parts of Ireland. The natives may be clear about why some meadows are dominated by grasses and plantains, while others are dense with oxeye daisies. And they may know where to find the real rarities. But for us visitors, with only a short time to spare, some interpretation is needed. To see the Burren's rarities, you should come in late spring and early summer. Above everything else, the Burren is celebrated for its orchids. 22 out of Ireland's 27 species grow here. The first one to bloom is this one, the early purple orchid. It appears in late April and blooms until June. Then the taller spikes of the fragrant orchid make their appearance. It's abundant in the Burren, but very rare elsewhere. Most Irish orchids are pollinated by insects, and some of them mimic the look of the insects that do the job. The fly orchid imitates the female Gorites wasp in order to attract the attentions of the male. Ironically, the orchid that looks most like its pollinator, the bee orchid, tends to be self-pollinating in Ireland. Plants that are calcium-loving, the orchids and the bloody cranesbills, will thrive in the burren. Variety, however, does not mean wealth. In fact, the soil in these burren meadows is often thin and quite poor. It lacks nitrogen, so dainty flowers like the cowslip are not shaded out by greedier plants like grasses that in richer soils can grow tall and fast. This lack of competition from tall plants is vital to the survival of the spring gentian. Why so many plants from far-flung corners of Europe should grow side by side here in the burren intrigues the experts. This is eyebright, a common enough herb of grassy places, reputed to have healing properties. Mountain avens is most common in the high Arctic. Its structure is well adapted to survive in the inclement weather of the Arctic mountains. And the extraordinary thing is that it thrives here, just inches away from this very rare flower. The dense-flowered orchid is a plant not of the Arctic or mountain tops, but of the warm south, the Mediterranean. But the one overriding condition that fosters such strange floral communities is the availability of light. This landscape of light is partly the result of the burren's geology. Most of the burren's bird life reflects the absence of trees. The ringed plover usually breeds on sandy and pebbly coasts. For this pair, the stony pavement of the burren beside Mullack Moor resembles a magnificent giant beach. The meadow pipit is a common bird of moorland and bogs. Here it's chosen to nest not just on the ground, but in a deep cavity between the rocks. No trees means no shelter from the cutting westerly gales. Even where they do establish themselves, taller plants, this is a rowan tree, must keep their heads down or develop in a dwarfed form. Slowly, tufts of herbs may spread and become a thin turf. But nothing can grow too vigorously here. As well as the poor soil and the biting wind, there is another factor which keeps down the stronger plants, even the tenacious hazel scrub that might otherwise shade out the light. Herds of browsing feral goats traverse the burren. They've been here for a very long time, nibbling everything they see. Nothing can take over. And there are natural nibblers as well. The Irish hare is widespread on the burren. And its influence as a mower has a significant effect on the turf. The Burren may seem a dry land, but there is water everywhere, flowing under the rock in hidden passages and welling out into lakes. Permanent lakes are fringed by small reed beds where otters can hide. Here, herons stalk lugubriously along the shores. And in these hidden places, the otters are unlikely to be disturbed as they move from pool to pool. But many of the lakes in the Burren are not true lakes. They are turloughs, literally dry lakes. When the underground water table rises, the waters push up through swallow holes and flood the grassy depressions to create temporary lakes. The temporary waters of the turloughs support life, but life in a hurry. These are sticklebacks. They lay their eggs in the turlough's bed and must rush to complete their breeding cycle before the water drains away. The turlough's frogs don't have the same problem. They can head for life on dry land as soon as they have 4 legs to rely on. Above surface, the season is changing. The water level is falling fast, and the swan will soon take her cygnets away from the turlough to a more reliable water source. Summer comes back to the Burren. The sheep have returned to graze on the lush grass of what was the lake bottom. The cuckoos are arriving. The Burren begins to bloom again. What we have seen, the splendour of the gentians and the intriguing relationships between the Burren's flowers and its landscape, is protected for us within the modest confines of this small national park.